In the middle of the 20th century, the Soviet Union constructed entire cities that, at least on paper, did not exist. They were erased from maps, omitted from atlases, and ignored by official censuses. No road signs pointed the way to them, and their names were never spoken in newspapers, on the radio, or in school textbooks. To anyone outside their guarded gates, these places were invisible, a kind of national mirage maintained by secrecy and fear. Yet behind their barbed wire fences and military checkpoints, life unfolded in a parallel reality. Streets bustled with families, schools educated children, and factories operated day and night. These hidden communities, known as closed cities, became the most secretive nodes in the Soviet Union's Cold War infrastructure. Their very existence was paradoxical. Tens of thousands of people lived openly inside them, while officially, to the rest of the world and even to many Soviet citizens, they had vanished from the face of the earth. The origins of these closed cities can be traced directly to the escalating tensions of the Cold War. After the United States demonstrated its nuclear dominance with the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Soviet leadership under Joseph Stalin resolved never to be left behind again. Within months, Soviet scientists were ordered to create weapons equal to or greater than those of their Western rivals. To achieve this, they required secure facilities where research could be carried out in complete isolation from prying eyes. The result was the birth of entire towns devoted exclusively to military science and industrial production. Each city was surrounded by armed guards, its borders clearly marked by fences and warning signs. Entry and exit were tightly controlled, permitted only with special passes that listed the bearer's precise destination. For ordinary Soviet citizens, the locations were off limits. For those inside, they became both home and prison. Life inside the closed cities carried strange contradictions. On one hand, residents often enjoyed privileges that other Soviet citizens could only envy. Apartments were modern, consumer goods were better stocked, and cultural amenities from schools and libraries to theaters and sports facilities were comparatively advanced. The government wanted its scientists, engineers, and technicians to feel rewarded for their sacrifice, to believe they were a select vanguard in the struggle against the capitalist West. Yet this comfort came with heavy restrictions. Friends and relatives outside could not visit without clearance. Letters were censored, addresses disguised with postal codes instead of city names. Chelyabinsk 40, one of the most infamous closed cities, was officially nothing more than Mailbox 40. To write home from there was to send a message from a ghost location, a parallel world that officially did not exist. Families grew up in these enclaves, but the children often realized only later that they had been raised in a place their country pretended was not real. The secrecy surrounding these cities was not only designed to protect sensitive information from the West, it was also a means of controlling knowledge within the Soviet Union itself. By erasing cities from official maps and banning discussion in the press, the state controlled what its people could know about the scale of its military-industrial complex. Nuclear reactors could melt down, chemical leaks could poison rivers, and yet no public alarm would follow if the existence of the city itself was hidden. The Kyshtym disaster of 1957, one of the world's worst nuclear accidents, occurred near Chelyabinsk 40, but the Soviet public was never told. Entire villages were quietly evacuated, contaminated lands abandoned, and yet the name of the city where it happened was never spoken aloud. In this way, the system of closed cities became more than a security measure. It became a tool of political control, ensuring that disasters could be managed not only physically but also psychologically by keeping them invisible. Today, the existence of these places is no longer secret, but their details still astonish historians. Imagine an entire urban landscape, tens of thousands of men, women, and children living day-to-day lives while being erased from official records. Maps showed forests where houses stood, blank fields where factories roared, empty spaces where entire schools and hospitals functioned. For those inside, it was a life of both privilege and imprisonment. For those outside, it was an absence, a blank that symbolized the Soviet Union's obsession with secrecy. The story of the closed cities is not just about the weapons built within their walls. It is about the people who were asked to vanish for the sake of national survival, about the human cost of a state willing to erase its own citizens from the record of existence. Their world was a paradox of comfort and confinement, a hidden dimension of history that, even decades later, forces us to reconsider how far a nation will go to protect its secrets. The birth of the Soviet Union's closed cities cannot be separated from the terrifying dawn of the nuclear age. When the United States detonated atomic bombs over Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945, Soviet leaders immediately understood that the balance of global power had shifted overnight. Joseph Stalin, wary of falling behind in this new arms race, launched a crash program to match America's nuclear capability as quickly as possible. To do so, the Soviet Union needed not only scientists and engineers but also secure environments, where research could take place in absolute secrecy. Out of this necessity, the idea of closed cities was born. These would not be mere laboratories or isolated military bases but entire functioning urban centers, self-contained ecosystems designed to hide some of the most dangerous work ever undertaken by human hands. The first of these closed cities, Arzamas 16, became the Soviet equivalent of Los Alamos, where the American Manhattan Project had been conducted. Located deep within the Russian countryside, far from prying eyes or foreign spies, it was home to the Soviet Union's top physicists, chemists, and engineers. Here, under conditions of extreme secrecy, the USSR's first atomic bomb was designed and assembled. Other cities soon followed: Chelyabinsk 40 for plutonium production, Tomsk 7 for enrichment, and dozens more with code numbers instead of names. Each was built with the same principle in mind: total isolation from the outside world, combined with the infrastructure of a normal city so that workers and their families could live permanently within its guarded boundaries. By the early 1950s, a vast hidden archipelago of such cities stretched across the Soviet Union, invisible on maps yet central to the superpower conflict. The purpose of these cities went far beyond building bombs. They became hubs of advanced research and industrial production, where entire factories and laboratories were dedicated to nuclear physics, chemical engineering, and aerospace technology. The Soviet leadership recognized that secrecy offered an advantage not only in protecting information, but in concentrating resources. Within the closed cities, the best minds of the country were gathered, provided with state-of-the-art equipment, and encouraged or compelled to push science into new frontiers. While much of the Soviet economy struggled with shortages and inefficiency, these hidden cities were supplied with superior housing, better food, and modern amenities. They were simultaneously prisons and sanctuaries, designed to ensure loyalty while extracting the maximum output from their inhabitants. The system also allowed the state to enforce strict control over its specialists. By confining scientists and workers to closed cities, the authorities reduced the risk of defection or espionage. A physicist who might have been tempted to share secrets with the West found himself surrounded by fences, guards, and a carefully monitored community. Travel outside required official permission, and surveillance within ensured that dissent remained muted. At the same time, propaganda reinforced the idea that those who lived in closed cities were the chosen few, entrusted with the defense of socialism. The contradiction was striking. Residents were both privileged and restricted, celebrated as heroes of the Soviet project while denied the freedom to leave. Over time, the system of closed cities grew into a sprawling network, numbering more than 40 by some estimates. Each carried a code name, usually derived from the nearest large city with a number appended, like Arzamas 16 or Krasnoyarsk 26. To outsiders, these codes meant nothing. To those inside, they represented the boundary of their world, the origins and purpose of these cities revealed the essence of the Soviet approach to the Cold War: secrecy as survival, isolation as strategy, and human lives as instruments in the pursuit of power. By building entire cities that officially did not exist, the Soviet Union demonstrated not only its determination to compete with the West but also its willingness to sacrifice transparency, individuality, and freedom in the name of security. The closed city was both a weapon and a warning, a reminder that in the nuclear age, control over knowledge was as important as control over arms. Life inside the Soviet Union's closed cities presented a strange paradox, a world of privilege wrapped in confinement. On the surface, these secret towns were designed to appear almost idyllic compared to the struggles of ordinary Soviet life. Apartments were freshly built and equipped with reliable heating, a crucial advantage during long Russian winters. Food supplies were more abundant, with stores often stocked with items considered luxuries elsewhere in the Soviet Union, such as fresh fruit, butter, and even imported goods. Families who lived within the guarded gates enjoyed access to better medical care and well-funded schools. Cinemas screened the latest films, libraries offered shelves of technical and cultural works, and sports facilities gave children outlets for activity. To outsiders, if they had known such cities existed, the standard of living might have seemed enviable. Yet this comfort came with invisible chains. No matter how modern their apartments or how well-stocked their stores, the residents lived in places that officially did not exist, their addresses reduced to anonymous code numbers and post office boxes. The contradiction became most evident in personal relationships. Families living in closed cities often found themselves isolated from relatives who remained in the outside world. Visitors were rarely permitted, and when they were, the process was exhausting, requiring background checks and official permissions that could take weeks or months. Children born within these cities grew up believing their environment was normal, only to discover as teenagers or young adults that their hometowns were nowhere to be found on official maps. Letters were censored, and even routine communication with family outside was restricted. To the wider Soviet population, the closed cities were whispers and rumors at best, with code names like Mailbox 40 or Post Office 26 standing in place of real addresses. For those who lived inside, the absence of recognition created a haunting sense of invisibility. They were present and absent at the same time, citizens of cities erased from geography. At the same time, life inside was infused with a kind of pride. Residents were constantly reminded, through propaganda posters and official speeches, that they were the chosen few entrusted with the nation's most important mission. The state presented their sacrifice as heroic, their isolation as proof of loyalty, and their privilege as a reward for service. Many accepted this narrative, convinced that their restricted lives were justified by the importance of their work. School children recited slogans about defending socialism with science. Workers signed secrecy oaths promising never to reveal the nature of their jobs. Yet beneath the surface, doubts festered. People wondered whether their loyalty was freely given or coerced, whether the privileges they enjoyed truly outweighed the loss of freedom. In that tension, daily life oscillated between pride and quiet resentment, between comfort and captivity. The environment also fostered a culture of surveillance and mistrust. Neighbors monitored neighbors, colleagues reported colleagues, and the knowledge that informants could be anywhere shaped behavior. Conversations were guarded, friendships cautious. A careless word spoken in frustration could lead to interrogation, demotion, or worse. Children, repeating something overheard at home, could unintentionally endanger their parents. The very design of the closed city reinforced this atmosphere. Fences kept outsiders away, but they also reminded insiders that they were watched. Isolation provided privilege, but it also created a prison without bars, where the boundaries of loyalty and fear blurred daily. This was the essence of contradiction. The cities promised a better life but delivered it in a cage lined with propaganda and secrecy. Despite these tensions, life in the closed cities carried on with a rhythm that, for many, became normal. Families celebrated birthdays, students studied mathematics and literature, workers attended factory shifts, and retirees gathered in parks to play chess. Generations grew up in these enclaves, forming communities with deep bonds even in the absence of recognition from the outside world. Yet every aspect of that life remained haunted by the contradiction at its core. The residents were at once privileged and invisible, honored and silenced, rewarded and confined. Their existence illustrates the human cost of secrecy, where comfort was given not as freedom but as containment. The story of their daily lives is one of resilience, of people adapting to circumstances imposed upon them, but also a reminder that the most sophisticated systems of control can disguise captivity as privilege. Secrecy, while designed to protect the Soviet Union's strategic advantage, also concealed disasters that would have shocked the world had they been known at the time. The most infamous of these was the Kyshtym disaster of 1957, a nuclear accident that unfolded near the closed city of Chelyabinsk-40. In a plutonium production facility, a cooling system failed, leading to a catastrophic explosion that released massive amounts of radioactive material. Entire villages were contaminated, and thousands of people were exposed to lethal doses of radiation. Yet, because Chelyabinsk-40 did not officially exist, the Soviet state was able to contain the story. Evacuations were carried out quietly, victims were relocated without explanation, and maps were redrawn to erase the scar of destruction. To the outside world, nothing had happened at all. Only decades later, when archives began to open, did the true scale of the disaster become known, revealing a tragedy second only to Chernobyl in terms of radioactive release. Rumors of strange illnesses began to circulate among Soviet citizens in nearby regions. Farmers spoke of livestock dying suddenly, rivers where fish no longer swam, and villages where entire families grew sick at once. Yet official explanations never mentioned radiation. Doctors were instructed to diagnose symptoms as influenza, malnutrition, or other common ailments. Those who asked too many questions were silenced or transferred. For the residents of closed cities themselves, these silences were deafening. They understood that something terrible had occurred, but without confirmation, their fears could only be whispered in private. It was a system of denial perfected by secrecy. If the city did not exist, then neither could the disaster within it. The accidents were not limited to nuclear facilities. Chemical plants and weapons laboratories carried their own risks, and leaks or explosions occasionally devastated workers and surrounding environments. In Krasnoyarsk 26, for example, stories persisted of chemical clouds drifting across the city after an accident at a nearby facility. In Tomsk 7, tales spread of sudden evacuations that were never explained, with buses arriving in the middle of the night to remove entire blocks of residents. The lack of transparency created an atmosphere where rumor carried more weight than fact. People lived with a constant awareness that something dangerous could be happening behind laboratory doors, and that they might never be told the truth until it was too late. Journalists outside the Soviet Union occasionally caught fragments of these stories, usually from defectors or foreign visitors who pieced together scraps of evidence. Western intelligence agencies also tried to monitor the situation, analyzing satellite images for signs of unusual construction or sudden evacuations. But without direct access, much of what was reported remained speculative. Articles appeared in foreign newspapers hinting at nuclear accidents, unexplained illnesses, and mysterious towns hidden from maps. For readers in the West, such reports fed the image of the Soviet Union as a land of secrecy and danger. For those inside the USSR, however, these rumors were unspoken realities, lived every day in the shadow of fences and silence. The legacy of these accidents and rumors is one of mistrust. For decades, survivors struggled with illnesses that were never officially acknowledged. Families who lost loved ones had no records to prove what had happened, no documentation to explain their suffering. Even today, some details remain classified, buried deep in archives that have yet to be fully opened. The closed cities left behind not only physical scars on the land but psychological scars on their people. They illustrate the terrible cost of secrecy. When truth itself is hidden, every tragedy becomes both a disaster and a mystery. In the absence of transparency, rumor becomes history, and uncertainty becomes a permanent part of collective memory. The closed cities of the Soviet Union remain one of the most haunting symbols of the Cold War, representing a fusion of secrecy, power, and human sacrifice. For decades, their existence was denied, their names erased, and their people silenced. Yet within their guarded borders, the Soviet Union produced the technologies and weapons that defined its superpower status. The nuclear bombs designed in Arzamas 16, the plutonium refined in Chelyabinsk-40, the reactors built in Tomsk 7, all of these achievements emerged from towns that officially did not exist. Their legacy is inseparable from the fear that dominated Global politics in the second half of the 20th century. They illustrate how a state willing to erase entire cities from the map could also erase the boundaries between truth and lies, necessity and cruelty, survival and secrecy. For the people who lived there, the legacy was deeply personal. Many carried pride in the role they played, convinced that their work helped preserve the balance of power and prevented war with the West. They saw themselves as guardians of their nation, entrusted with responsibilities far greater than ordinary citizens. But alongside that pride came scars. Families were separated, freedoms curtailed, and lives shortened by exposure to radiation or toxic chemicals. Survivors often speak of a strange duality. They built the weapons that secured their country's survival, yet they did so in places where their own survival was never guaranteed. The contradictions of their daily lives extended into their memories, leaving behind stories both of resilience and of regret. In the years following the collapse of the Soviet Union, many of these closed cities began to open, at least partially. Some were granted official names for the first time, while others remained restricted but acknowledged. Historians gained access to archives, uncovering documents that revealed the full scale of the secrecy system. Western journalists visited, describing cities that had been invisible for half a century. Yet even in openness, the shadows lingered. Entire communities had been shaped by decades of censorship, and information about accidents, deaths, and environmental contamination was slow to emerge. The truth, once hidden, does not reveal itself easily. Layers of silence built over generations cannot be stripped away overnight. Today, the legacy of the closed cities is still visible in multiple ways. Some continue to function as centers of research, though under tighter international oversight. Others have declined, their populations shrinking as younger generations leave for opportunities elsewhere. Still others exist as half-forgotten relics, with decaying buildings and rusting fences testifying to a past that is both proud and painful. They remind us of the price of secrecy, of the dangers of concentrating so much power within invisible borders. They also remind us that history is not only about leaders and battles, but about the communities asked to vanish from public memory in service of the state. The cities stand as monuments, not carved in stone but built from silence, absence, and erased maps. Ultimately, the story of the Soviet Union's closed cities forces us to confront the deeper questions of history. How much secrecy can a society sustain before it begins to collapse under the weight of its own lies? How many sacrifices can be demanded in the name of survival before survival itself becomes meaningless? The closed cities demonstrate the extremes of human control, the willingness of governments to shape not only weapons but entire realities. Their legacy is a mirror, reflecting both the ingenuity and the cruelty of the Cold War era. In remembering them, we are reminded that the darkest chapters of history are often not those that leave monuments behind, but those that leave only absences, cities that thrived for decades, then vanished from the maps as if they had never existed at all.